Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, here we are.
It is exactly on time.
This is the first time I've ever been on time in my
First
life.
time, the only time.
Yes,
And
I
you're here to
actually,
witness it, dear listener.
I actually, I was even born early. But that was the only time I've been early in my entire life. And my mom always says, she's like, I'm going to be late to my own funeral. She says that about herself. And I'm going to be late to my own funeral as well.
As long as you're only like 5 minutes late, I think there's a grace period there. I think Death doesn't really mind. He's a pretty nice
Oh,
guy
that's good.
or
Oh,
girl.
you guys
Yeah.
chat often?
Well, no, but I'm reading Neil Gaiman's the second part of the Sandman series right now, which our buddy Danny lent to me.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, apparently Death is this pretty cool chick. So
Oh,
yeah.
I like it. I like it. I have to say, Ryder, when he got here, unfortunately for you viewers at home who were thinking that we have this lovely relationship where he just stays in my cellar, he actually lives in his own humble abode, and he comes over in the morning for us to shoot this, so we could be here live in person for you guys.
Yeah, I drive all the way over here.
It's quite the trek.
Yeah.
It's I'm very impressed that you make it.
Yeah, but when I am at home, mostly I just sit around pining for being at Reed's
Yes, I mean, who
in the
doesn't?
basement.
Who doesn't? Well, anyway, so he had been texting me when he got here, which is very millennial of you, by the way.
Oh, thank you. For
Wait,
an old man, it's tough on the thumbs.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes. And I was like, dude, just call me. Like, I'm doing things, walking around. Like, I'm gonna miss your text. And so he called me today, and it pops up and it says, Ryder Richards, Danny's friend. So that's your title in
That's
my
my
phone.
tagline.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. Yeah. One of these days I maybe can achieve to be more,
Yes.
not just rando dude on the couch or, knob tickler or whatever
One
the
of these
thing
days,
is.
when
Oh,
you grow
but by
up.
the way, that knob reference was an audio reference we made earlier. It
Ah,
wasn't,
yes.
yeah.
I'm not
Needed
sure
to
I quite.
clarify that.
I'm not quite sure I picked up on that. We were talking about tweaking the levels, and yes, I think that's funny that you bring that up because that's the topic for today. You know what else is funny is my mic stand, which is $20 made in China and it's failing. I'm so surprised.
What?
You
Oh,
mean you need to spend money for something to be quality?
man. Oh.
Oh my
When
goodness.
I was a kid, then, oh, wait.
Anyways, we were saying
Right. Not
today the
enough time to
topic
get into my stories.
today the topic is going to be humor. Or comedy, or however you want to phrase that. But that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But before we talk about that, let's talk about. Let's recap a little bit about what we talked about yesterday. Yesterday,
Yeah.
we kind of opened the lid on privacy. And we started to kind of introduce some of the history. We talked a little bit about how it came to be and the difference of search and seizure, and then governments right to bear arms probably
Right,
came
right.
up in there.
Yeah, we do have a lot of extra topics we didn't quite get into, but yeah, the privacy topic once it gets into those human rights and it gets into the way our society functions. Ooh,
Yeah,
man, like that's opening a can of worms, and it could go on. I mean, we could just have a whole podcast
we
dedicated
could,
to
and
that.
I'm sure
And
there are
I'm
plenty that
not
are.
one episode, but yeah, like
Right.
years worth of just ranting
Because yeah, I
online.
mean, we just barely started talking about the data part and how you're kind of like Linus from Charlie Brown. You're spewing data all over, and people are making money off of that, and people are using that to know who you are and sell that information to other people. So we barely touched on that in social media. So we'll be coming back to those things.
Yeah, that'll be good topics. And of course, we'll try to do a little bit of research and be able to point you in a couple of directions that we think are interesting. That becomes a problem with some of these topics when they get so large is like, what is relevant to talk about? Because I
Yeah.
think Reed and I could just go on tangents all day.
Yeah, indeed. I think that'll be our next show, Tangents All Day.
Yeah, new show title.
But yeah, why don't you remind us what our challenge was from yesterday, both in case someone wants to do it
Yeah.
now or in case they already have.
So we talked a little bit. I had talked to you about having a security specialist friend of mine say one of the things that he recommends is not to use either the same browser or the same search engine all the time. So typically when we say things like Google it, then that's just using a search engine. You could also use Bing or DuckDuckGo. There's a whole variety of them out there. And fascinatingly for me, our challenge was, of course, to try to use something different. Just to sort of break up your habits and make sure that you're not giving all of your information to any one source. And one of the things that I thought I would do is actually use Google. So I didn't download Chrome on my phone, but I do have Google, which is probably basically the same thing. So for the first time in a long time on my phone, I used Google to search for something.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you went the opposite
I
direction,
did,
right?
I did, because I figured I'd been using like things like Start Page and all these other ones that are sort of, I don't know, hidden and pretty cruddy actually, and I was just blown away at how amazing the results are. Like instantly with Google, it was like spot on what I was looking for. Usually I have to scroll for 2 to 3 pages on some of these other
Right,
search
which I
engines.
mean gets to that whole trade-off, right? That's why
Hmm.
people are willing to give up their privacy, and they don't want to pay,
Right.
because one, they don't see the value because it's always been free, which we touched on a little bit, but we'll drive that home a little more next time. But for me, I took it more to heart, and I was making a recipe the other day or yesterday rather, and I was like, I don't remember. Is this 1 cup or 2 cups? So I got out and I walked over to the library and I talked to the librarian and she pulled up the stacks of newspapers and I pulled through the slide sorter and I
Oh
pressed one by
man.
one. It was great.
You whew, wow, you went way back.
You know,
Like, were you just trying to be like an old man like me? What?
every day, every day.
Achieve more, waste more time, go to the
Yes.
library, talk to people.
Wait, talk to people? Why would
Ah,
you
so
ever do
strange.
that?
Isn't it awkward? Don't you get queasy inside?
I kind of am right now, honestly. And with that, I think that's a great transition. That was a joke, by the way. I did not actually go to the library. For those of you at home who are like, man, he went to the. I actually did go to the library the other day, but did not do anything with the slide sorters or anything
And
like that.
avoided all people at all costs.
All
Yeah.
people.
Hmm.
Speaking of all people, I figured that we should, maybe let's just run the intro real quick. What do you
Ooh,
think?
I like that. That's for all people.
There we go.
Helpful for life.
Well, welcome to the show that is in the morning. We once called TBD, and we are still, we're still mulling around on it. I think we may end up with something else, but we're not sure. That's why it's TBD. Also, as you can see at the top, it's still called the morning show because that's the overlay that we had, and I didn't want to change it if I was gonna have to change it again.
Well, that's very efficient of you and
Oh,
quite
thanks.
confusing for our audience, but we know that you're all intelligent people and you're in on the joke.
Yes.
So it's
that's
fine.
That's part of what it is, and you guys are part of us becoming better people. Yeah, I mean, what else can we say?
Yeah, you're helping us to become better by just giving us someone to talk to.
Yes,
We're-
yes, we are. And speaking of better people, here's Writers Up Close for the day. Just inspiring men, women, children,
Anyone that wants a patchy beard,
librarians.
come on.
He's good at talking
Librarians.
with men. That makes him, or not men.
Yeah,
people.
well,
Por qué no los dos?
oh,
Anyways, I'm Reed Garcia, the
and
founder of Helpful
Ryder
for Life.
Richards over here, the guy who plays with knobs.
Yes, and speaking of that knob twirler, why don't you introduce us a little bit about our topic of humor today?
Oh yeah, so yesterday, being that I am kind of known as Danny's friend to Reed, that's actually my category in his phone. Danny is one of these really funny guys, a mutual friend that we hang out with and really enjoy being around. So anytime we're around him, of course, humor comes up as something we just do naturally, which of course leads us to start thinking about how that works and why that works so well and why we sort of get these endorphin rushes that last for long periods of time after hanging out and having a good time with our friends. um, there's just a little note whenever we were sort of doing the script for the show today that was the good kind of idiot. So curious, Reed, where did that come from?
Oh, the good kind of idiot. It's great because I was actually talking about you.
Oh, perfect.
Oh, that's great. Oh,
Kazing.
man. Yeah. And for those of you who are wondering who the heck Danny is, Danny actually made an appearance on this show last Friday, which would have been October the 8th. And we talked about, or was that 2 Fridays ago? Sorry.
Guess
Two
it was
Fridays
2
ago.
Fridays,
So
yeah.
October the 1st. Man, time flies when you're having fun.
Yes, when you're podcasting.
And we talked about music, and Danny brought 3 very different songs, and is very interesting. I won't say more than that. Go check it out, October 1st, Friday, to see that. And so, yeah, I was talking about Danny, and I was like, hey, Danny, I think tomorrow we're going to talk about humor, comedy. You got any ideas for that? And I got to mention the first thing that he said naturally, which is one of the beauties of Danny, is that he is not afraid to go to the immature level. And we talked a little bit about that. When was that?
Oh, a couple days ago.
Yeah, that might have been this past Friday.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember. We'll have our producers do it in post.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That was the day that we had the alliteration with the 4 P's.
Yes, I do think that was Friday. But even if it wasn't, look for the episode, which will futurely be titled something along the lines of pouting. It was Friday for sure. Yeah, Friday the 8th. But anyways,
yeah, we got into the whole immaturity thing of like laughing about penises.
Yes,
right? Why that is funny.
Yes,
and
so Danny naturally, I was like, oh, we're talking about humor and comedy, and he's like, well, you guys could talk about penises. I know you guys just touched on the tip of that the other day, but you could. And I was like, yeah, thanks,
Danny. Of course, thank you, Danny.
Thanks, Danny. Yes,
keeping us grounded. That's one of the beautiful things about humor too, is that it really can sort of undercut some things and keep you grounded. Just reminding you that you are a living creature in this world, and that there are silly things, and sometimes getting wrapped up in our own heads in whatever kind of serious capacity we're in.
Yeah. Well, speaking of keeping you grounded, let's get back to how you're an idiot. So,
yes.
So Danny was talking, and Danny's going into the Air Force, and we were talking about, he isn't an officer when he first goes in, but after a year he could become an officer. And he's like, I don't know if I want to be an officer or not, because I'm worried about maybe potentially having to deal with all those idiots. And I was like, you deal with Ryder and me all the time. And he's like, you guys are the good kind of idiots.
Thanks, Danny.
Yes. And I was like, yeah, good kind of idiots. I like that. So that's kind of where that came from.
Yeah. There is kind of I would say a tremendous amount of forgiveness that comes with being the right kind of idiot, which kind of reminds me too, a while back I was reading a book and a guy brought up the etymology or history or whatever of the word idiot. It's apparently Greek or something, and it's idiota.
Okay.
And idiota basically means to behave as if you're in private when you're in public.
I like that a lot, honestly.
Yeah.
I really like that.
It's really fantastic.
And I would actually define that as the good kind of idiot. And I don't do this often, but I'm inspired to make a social media post about that where, it says, idiot, be more like this.
Yeah, right. Well, and what's kind of fascinating about it is there's, if you go back into the Greek, then there's home and social life and the police and, and oikos. And so when you sort of break up these terms and start thinking about, there are different rules. The way that you handle your life at home, the things that you do in private, those are for you. But when you're out in public, then you at least need to be aware of other people, be aware of your role in the world, be aware of how you move through the world. And so there's this kind of fascinating breakdown, which of course to be an idiot is to behave as if you're at home whenever you're in a role that actually requires some sort of responsibility that you aren't stepping up to. So that's sort of the original use of it, but I think we could kind of flip that and use it differently today.
Yeah, and just real quick comment on that. I mean, I think that it is good to have some things like that you are, right? Different roles, different, and kind of like we were talking about the other day with known, and we've referenced a few times since, having those layers of software, right, on top of yourself. Those that, well, now I'm, at work, here's this software I'm going to load on that. Or, I'm at church, here's this software I'm going to load at that. I'm not going to yell out inappropriate jokes in the middle of the sermon. Always, just sometimes. Amen, hallelujah. Yeah. Kids, if you're listening, do not try that at home. It might be a great way to get you to never go to church again, but you will probably have some bad implications.
Yeah, I don't know. Weird how people take certain things very seriously, and whenever you make fun of them, they get really angry.
Yes.
So strange.
I know. That's definitely something that we will talk about here today, because one of the other things that Danny mentioned that I thought was, I think we might have talked about as well, but I was glad to hear him bring it up. He was like, well, the beauty of the immature, quote unquote, humor, which we talked about, is it really maturity or not? And he was like, I think, the people who laugh at that more, who maintain some more of that childlikeness, he's like, the more like a child people are, the more human they are, and is kind of what he was saying. I'm paraphrasing, of course. And that kind of went hand in hand with, we've talked about that type of thing. Like the more that you I guess, fold and compromise who you are, what you're thinking. You know, the less creative you may become, the less emotional you may become. So yeah, it kind of tied in a lot with some of the things we'd been saying.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, it's just an interesting point to keep in mind is there is something within society that could, and we'll probably touch on this later, but there is a tendency to mechanize people. And that's a lot of that has to do with control. A lot of that has to do with the Industrial Revolution. Like it can go back before that as well, but there's always sort of been this tendency. And if you're not careful, you can slip into it, and you can mistake that for being the authentic you.
Right. And for those of you who are at home, whether you're here with us live or you're listening after the fact, go ahead and throw down in the comments, you know, what does humor mean to you? What does comedy mean to you? You know, what, maybe it could be something that you find funny. Maybe it's something that you don't find funny. Maybe you completely disagree with us about this immaturity thing, and we're just not mature enough to realize that.
And then we'll probably make immature comments on your comments.
We probably will, yes. And that is most likely a guarantee. But yeah, so I think in general, a good place to start with most topics is, you know, what's kind of the history of humor? Like how did this come about, and what, you know, how has it changed forms over the years?
Yeah, no, good questions. Of course, when back in my day, in the 1600s. No, I mean, this is also something as it seems to go through phases according to what a society needs, which is, I'm going to, I think, continually sort of bring this back to the social aspect, because while humor feels very personal, it might actually play a larger role in society. So when we get into things, I know Reed and I briefly touched on this idea that maybe there's something really amazing about slapstick, physical humor.
And I was gonna say, define slapstick for us.
Yeah, you know, I would say the Three Stooges are slapstick. Physical humor would be something like Charlie Chaplin. I think, of course, during the times of like silent movies, physical humor was a fantastic way to convey anything.
And just to give some examples of physical humor, one of the most common things that I can think of is when you're trying to entertain a small child. When in doubt, pretend that you hurt yourself somehow, or you fell down, or whatever, and that kid will just start cracking
Why
up.
is that so funny, Reed?
It's got to be hardwired into us somehow, right? Because I think, and I don't know if this is true for all humor or all comedy. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on it, but I think the main thing, one of the key factors of comedy is something unexpected, right? You're sitting there, and like if they're talking about the anatomy of a joke, like part of it is like the setup. You're setting up the thing, you're telling the story, you're painting the picture, and then you're making it look like things are going to go one way, things are going to go this way, and then just when people think they know, you twist it on them and you tell them something completely out there, and maybe the more left field, the better. And then, you know, if that thing in left field happens to offend some people, that honestly often gets more laughs, and maybe some people get a little offended and they don't laugh, but then people are laughing at them, and then, you know, then there's that whole mix of laughing at versus laughing with, which, you know, we could talk a little bit now, or we could, you know, talk about it a little bit later.
Yeah, let's hang on to that one for a second, because it ties into some of these things. So just the example you were giving up there, I think I did a little research, and there's sort of 4 early or sort of broad categories for why people laugh, because laughter is vital, right? It seems to be very important. It's a human trait. A lot of people have it, and so a lot of people have asked the question, why? Well, one of them might be the superiority thing, right? So when somebody hurts themselves, like for the child, when you pretend to hurt your hand or you fall down, and then they start laughing, there's something humorous about that, but there was this idea at one point that humor was because we felt superior to the other person. So this would definitely be kind of a laughing at. Like if you're walking through the forest and you're, you know, talking about this, one of the examples I heard is you're walking through a forest, you're talking about opening a vape shop, and then you trip and fall and bust on your face, and all your friends are laughing at you.
Was that Confucius who said that?
yeah, that was when you want to open not a vape shop, young one. Yeah. No, there's this idea that, are you laughing at the person because they hurt themselves and you feel superior? And that becomes this idea that even you're talking about, even if a comedian makes this joke, but you end up insulting somebody.
Yeah.
Like, does that result, you know, what is going on there? Now, this is a superiority idea. There's also this other one that's relief. And that there's a relief valve.
I'm glad that you have the words to name the things, right? Which, by the way, I feel like is one of the things that I really like about the idea of the show is sometimes we're going to have some research that we've done. We're going to have some specific terminology, but other times we're going to come with what we think and what we know and what we've learned. And then we'll explain something. And then what I'm hoping is the more we bring in experts, they'll be like, oh, yeah, well, that's this thing and that's this thing. And, oh, you're completely wrong about that thing. That's a common misconception. So this is a great example of that because, I was about to say, for me, the first thing I do when something like that happens, it's like a check to see, okay, are they okay? Are they really hurt? And then it's like, oh, no, let's laugh about it. And this also applies to children as well. We're just gonna keep talking about kids because they're great. They're a great audience. But
we're gonna talk about who's hardwired to do certain things. I mean, children and childhood development are interesting things to look at because once you've been indoctrinated and cultured into a society, who knows why you're laughing?
Yeah,
but when a kid laughs at something, maybe that's what we're wired for.
That is a very great point. And one of the you're making sure they're okay, right? And making sure they're not hurt, and then you're laughing. One, to kind of break the tension of the situation, and especially if it's a kid who's fallen, you're like, hey, you're okay. Like, you're really not hurt. I can see, like, maybe you screened your knee a little bit. You're fine. Yeah. Like, ha, ha, ha. Oh, that was a close one.
This was, right. Which is kind of interesting as well. It's like, we're going to use laughter to relieve the situation. Let's get past the pain of it. Everything is okay here.
And in your case, when you're walking through that forest and you trip and fall, like, I'm going to laugh, but you might really be hurt. Being as old as you are, it's like, oh my gosh, you got to be careful. Oh, that's funny until Medicare kicks in.
Now you have to drag me out of the forest.
Yes, exactly.
No, it's kind of, and then one of the other ideas too is, so there's basically 4 ideas, but if we go into, I guess the first one being like the superiority, and then we have relief, and then the one you were talking about where you kind of have a setup and then there's an alternate sort of ending, right? Where this is the way most jokes work, is this idea of incongruity. Like, we are building something, a storyline in some certain context, and then there's a shift at the end. So it sparks relief, but it's also funny because maybe the story didn't go where we expected it to go. So there's expectations and then getting those disrupted. So there's a little bit of pain in there because we often have empathy during the storyline.
Okay.
And then all of a sudden we're kind of nervous. We're caring for this person, which is one of the things that sort of undercuts the superiority idea, is that if you are empathetic, if you actually care about people, then you're not laughing necessarily because of superiority. You're laughing because of something else.
I'm laughing because I care.
Yes, because this is how I show I care.
That's pretty good. But it's interesting because I don't know that I've ever thought about humor and comedy being so closely connected to our feelings, right? And I would think and wonder, like, hey, does that mean if I am more connected with my feelings and have less layers of hardness and armor and stuff on top, like, am I going to be more likely to laugh at something? Do you think that has any truth to it?
Yeah, I think so. Especially when it gets into terms of this hardness and armor. The reason a lot of people might need that is for to see themselves a certain way in the world, confidence, and to be laughed at oftentimes means to be derided or not taken seriously. And the people that probably need a lot of armor are people who really want to be seen and taken seriously. So if you're the dictator of a small country, for instance, and somebody's on the corner and they're making jokes about you,
Wait, you mean like someone making jokes about someone's hand size or something like that?
Something like this, yes. Or their skin tone being, kind of like Cheetos or whatever. If you're making jokes about somebody and somebody has a fragile ego and they need that kind of, I don't know, whatever it is, power does seem to wrap itself up in these kind of armor. And one of the ways to undercut it is, of course, humor. So yes, if you bump into somebody who can't take a joke and doesn't take a joke, I tend to think that there's something else going on there that has something to do with insecurity and needing to be taken seriously.
Well, it's funny because, that it's kind of a two-way street. And it actually, I feel like when that person who's the target of the humor is like more insecure or whatever, which makes them in some ways a better target for that joke, it actually adds that superiority aspect even more to the ones who are the ones who are laughing at. Right.
Yeah.
And so they kind of like, it's like, oh, and this is like a classic technique for like avoiding bullies, right? And I was the worst person to try and make jokes at or bully when I was growing up because I leaned into it, right? And I was on a soccer team with guys at the high school, and people would be like, and I was part of this for other people, like talking about, oh yeah, your sister, haha, your mom, those types of things, right? Classic. And so yeah, people would be like, oh yeah, I was having fun with your sister last night, and I was like, yeah, me too. That was really cool. I had a great time. Like that one position you did, that was awesome. And then they just kind of like,
yeah, you were
circuit.
supposed to get hurt by this,
right?
And you were supposed to get angry and mad.
And I'm like, yeah, my sister was supposed to get hurt too, but she's still fine.
Yeah, well, it just takes all the wind out of it, right? These sort of attempts to hurt you that are deflected with humor, and then the person doesn't really know what to do. There's no place left to go. This is kind of a fascinating thing, is to just be able to roll with the punches. It's something that is weird that we're probably taught in youth. I have some of the same experiences growing up and playing sports. Is it's easy for people to want to bully somebody, and then within that, the minute you show them that you can be hurt, they try to go in twice as hard.
Right.
And so there is a kind of armor that happens through humor, and as a way to navigate the world. I don't know where to go with that, because that's just a super fascinating. When we're talking about feelings and we're talking about laughter, to be laughed at isn't fun, but also to have to fall into a world where you denigrate your sister for a joke to protect yourself from being bullied. Like, no one wants to be in this world.
Right. But, and one of the strings you're tugging on there, which we'll talk about a little bit maybe, is the tragedy linking to comedy, right? And how the comedy, drama, and how those can be so tightly connected. But before we talk a little bit about that, I wanted to see, for those of you who are just joining us, we're talking about humor, we're talking about comedy, and Ryder was walking us through a couple of the different types of humor, or why things are funny, I guess would be a better way of saying it. And so far, we talked about superiority. When one person or a group of people is using, or they're feeling better than whatever it is that they're making fun of. That's one reason why things can be funny. Another one is relief, which is...
Yeah. The sort of reaching back to homeostasis, feeling either tension, pleasure, pain, something, but laughing gets you back to a normal.
Right. And so that's for one example we used is if you are playing with a kid and you pretend to hurt yourself and then you're like, oh, we're all good. Right.
Yeah.
And the other one is the third one is incongruity, which is a way of saying, hey, I'm setting up something to make you think it's going to go this way, and then I'm going to completely break those expectations. Is there another way, or is that kind of the main?
That's one of the main ones. There is a fourth way, but for the incongruity, one of the things that always comes to my mind when I hear that one is that Groucho Marx joke where he says something like, oh, what is it? Outside of a dog, a book is a man's best friend. Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. Oh, yeah. I'm glad you laughed.
Yeah,
because this would have really been bad.
I was wondering. I was like, where's he going with this? And but that's the thing too, with an audience of one, right?
Yeah, right.
And I want to talk a little bit later, so we'll put a pin in it for now. But what humor is meant, like for me and personally. So we'll get back to that. But what is this fourth?
The fourth one is kind of, it takes some of the strengths of the other ones, because of course you can understand that it's hard to, if we had a superiority issue, well, I might feel superior to flowers and insects, and I might just run around laughing all day because I'm superior, right? Which is completely ridiculous. So there's some parts of these theories that don't really work out. So a guy named Henry Bergenson, he took these and wrote an essay on laughter, and he sort of combined several of them. And his idea was that when we tend to laugh, it's because the mechanical is encrusted upon the living.
Encrusted.
That's the quote for it. Yeah. Mechanical encrusted upon the living.
I like it.
Yeah. So I use deep voice when I go to quoting. One of the things about that's so fascinating is when you consider the living and when you consider the mechanical is, of course, a very human idea. And the real world, gravity, air, trees, right? They're just doing their thing. They're not intrinsically funny. There's nothing else about that. And the minute you start trying to make plans, like building a vape shop, right? And then nature trips you up and you fall, we're actually laughing because you were not paying attention to the reality that you were in.
Okay.
You gave up on the living flow of how the world operates, and you started trying to mechanize it. And the minute you started doing that, then we start laughing because it is quite humorous because of the folly involved, like making plans while the world moves on around you. So there's a certain, once again, tragedy, comedy that's kind of like meshed together because it is tragic that humans would try so desperately to mechanize nature.
So I'm not gonna lie. I think that one is a little harder to follow. A little, I don't know, maybe a little deeper. Would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think it's at some point it doesn't seem like it's humor at all. It seems like a way to think about maybe it's where laughter might come from in certain cases, but it seems to spring more into like how it interacts socially, how it interacts with the world. It seems like sociology, seems like a way to explain a lot of tendencies within humans. And whenever I hear jokes, I almost never think, haha, that was the mechanical encrusted upon the living. Like that never shows up in my brain.
You know, and I also was wondering if it's less of a, oh hey, here's this scene kind of thing. Oh, that's funny. More of a longer build up type of thing, like a grander thing. Like, and maybe
Right.
like within media, you could see this. And for example, like there's a book and there's this big long journey, and then something happens at the end or whatnot. One thing that kind of pops up in my mind is a situation in life where it's like, hey, this thing is happening, and you think you have control over it, and it's going to go this way, and then all of a sudden it's just like completely not, largely probably out of your control. And the phrase that comes to my mind is, well, I had no option but to laugh.
Right.
Would you say that kind of falls in that camp, or?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Is this once again? I think the idea of any kind of control is a very fascinating notion, and I think because we live in a civilization that makes us believe in the illusion of control, then we keep leaning into that illusion. And so when that illusion or that little illusion bubble is popped, well, then that you're only left with a couple of responses: crying or laughing.
Yeah. Well, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about a story you told me the other day about a contractor who was coming to your house. Out of respect for your privacy, as we talked about yesterday, I'll let you decide whether or not you want to tell that. But I thought it was relevant.
Oh no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, writer is telling me the story about how he's building this shed, and shed honestly is, in my mind, when I think shed, I think of something rickety and old. So I don't know. Have you ever had any thoughts about that word?
Yeah, shed is funny because it reminds me of like she shed,
Oh.
which is the small little portable garages that they made. It was popularized in a commercial where a lady made a little
for
room
women.
for herself.
She
Yes,
shed.
and
Nice.
so I guess I've got a he shed, and
He shed.
and it's on steroids because why build one unless you're gonna go overboard?
Yeah. I think a more accurate name probably is a shop. you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. This is pretty much it's a 30 by 40 workshop that's about, I don't know, 18 feet tall.
Yeah. And for those who like metric, convert those real quick in your head.
12.
Pretty close.
Oh, I don't know.
Pretty close. But anyway, so the building construction, especially nowadays with all of the logistical issues and job and manpower issues that have come up because of COVID, building has been, it's always been a complicated thing where things are going to go wrong, but I think it's been amplified within this past year or so. And so you were telling me a story about how you had a contractor come up who was, I don't know what he was trying to do. Let's just say the electrical or something. Like he came in, he's like, oh, I'm going to do this thing. But he came on the wrong day.
Yes. Oh, and he lost it.
He just completely lost it.
Which was funny because he had the phone call, he was advised on when to show up, and he just showed up on the wrong day. And instead of saying, I will come back tomorrow and finish the job when, all the steps have aligned.
And I'll make more money.
Right. And because I would actually finish the job, he just lost it.
And so he angrily approached the guy, started tensing his fists and yelling at him real angry. And we're out in the country where it's probably legal to shoot somebody, and it's Texas. So
it's Texas. Yeah, you never know what's going to go on. Yeah, so there were, fists clenched, voices raised, puffy chest going on, the whole thing. And the funny thing is, the guy that he was threatening just started laughing. I think the guy that was angry just didn't know how to handle it. You can either at that point double down on anger and take a swing, or you can realize that this guy might be dangerous.
Yeah.
Because he's laughing in the face of danger.
well, and he's the perfect one to do something with my sister, because I could have made that same
Oh,
joke and he had been
man.
like, wait, I don't know what to do with that
Yeah,
one.
oops.
And what a transition, huh? So I just thought that was an irrelevant story. So the 4 kind of reasons why things are funny, we've got superiority, which is where you feel like you're better than whatever is going on. There's relief, where, for example, you think something is bad or hurts or whatever, and then you use something to, oh, it's not that bad. Ha ha ha. You kind of get the relief there.
Yeah.
And then there's incongruity, which is where you have some sort of setup or thing like that where you think it's going to go one way and it changes at the last second. And then mechanical, I'll let you describe
The
that one more
mechanical
time.
encrusted upon the,
The
living.
mechanical crusted upon the living.
Yeah, which is just getting out of sync with the way the world actually operates.
With the way the world operates. I like that a lot. So speaking of being out of sync with the way the world operates, let's talk about me.
Yes.
And I'd be curious to hear your thoughts too about how humor's played a role in your life. But for me, I've always been very sarcastic. And I've also always loved off the cuff improvisational type of things. If I were to choose a type of comedy that I feel like I would do best at, it's improv versus stand up. I think I could do that type of stuff too, but I just really love going off the energy, going off the feel, and also just going for it, right?
Yeah, no, improv is fantastic. My wife actually took improv classes for a while
Nice.
down here in McKinney, and getting up on stage. And what's fascinating about improv is that everyone's in on the tension within the room. And that's also something that's fascinating when you're talking about building up these stories. There's a lot of tension, and everyone wants the person to do well. And whenever they nail a joke, that relief, right, just through the roof, and everyone is ecstatic that the joke was nailed. So there's something about improv that's kind of great in that it's a social dynamic at the same time. I think it's different with stand-up.
Yeah.
I think showing up with your routine and your patter and rocking through it in front of an audience, ooh, that's a whole different art. How do you make that authentic? How do you pull the audience in when you've already got your jokes lined up?
Yeah, and it's got a whole bunch of, they both have their own different skills and things that make it really good. And one of the things, this is true for both, but certainly with stand up, is you have that rehearsed routine. Well, one thing that you want to do is you want to have callbacks, and you want to say, have some joke early on. It's about this dude who's making a vape shop in the forest with Confucius.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, 5, 10, 20 minutes later, you bring up that same guy in some other joke. And it's like, not only is that funny now, but he's bringing up that thing he talked about a while ago.
Yeah. It's also, you're then part of the inside joke, right? Like you're in on it. You saw it, you're like, oh, that was a clever callback, right? The cleverness aspect is something else that I'm, when we're talking about humor in our lives, like I can be funny on occasion, but I'm not like always funny. And I
can attest to that.
Yeah. And I've got friends who are just so witty, and they're always on it and just nailing it. And what's funny about that is when you're hanging out with them, then oddly enough, I get funnier too.
Right.
It's like we all raise our own levels of funniness until I think that we're just hysterical. Like I think when my wife walks in, sometimes there's a bit of an eye roll.
For sure.
But
well, let's talk about that, because that was one of the things I wanted to bring up last time you brought up your wife. We're talking about.
He goes for the easy ones.
Talking about your wife. I mean, come on. You just softball me right there.
Just threw it out there.
Oh, man. But yeah, so when we're talking about how she took the improv class, and some of the things that popped in my head were the environment and the setting, right? And that's a really big part of it, right? And it also kind of ties in with me talking about myself and how humor's evolved within me. Because one of the things that I've really enjoyed using humor as is me not being afraid to fail. And I am A-okay with throwing out some joke, and especially the larger group there is, because you know what? I say, if I could at least one smile or even one chuckle, like, it was worth it. Like, it doesn't matter if it's 5, 10, 15 people and 19 people think I'm bomb, and it's also, for me, at least most of the time, I don't care so much if that person's laughing with me or at my joke, or at the fact that I made the joke, or that it was just so far out there or whatever. They're laughing. Like, the thing is there. And one of my favorite things that, my friends and family, they do, it's hilarious because they recognize that I have so many bad jokes, right? And so they're like, and of course they hear the most of them, right? Because they're around me so much. And it's like, they want so hard to not think something is funny, and so sometimes they'll do the fake laugh, but then they'll start real laughing, and I'm like, you can't fake laugh into a real laugh. It doesn't work like that.
Oh, that's great though. I mean, at least you're getting it right, because we're talking about these. If this is important to the way we move through the world, right? And it's hard to, I don't know, when things get too serious and then laughter shows up and it really kind of undercuts some things. Man, it just makes the world easier to move through. It
Yeah,
makes the day a little bit
it does.
better. It makes it a little bit brighter. So I'm a big fan of humor in that way. I also sort of realize my default tendency is to laugh at almost everything. It doesn't even have to be a joke. Like, it's just like, I'm prepared. I'm primed to laugh because I want to. Because I love laughing.
And that's the thing too, right? So it's about context. It's about expectations, right? And so the story I was going to tell was about how, you and I, we have all sorts of jokes as we're going on this podcast. We have a general, funny, entertaining type of vibe when we're hanging out, both on and off set, right? Set. We're so fancy. But yeah, so I had just come off of this week of doing this live stream, and I was feeling pretty good. And then I just gone and played disc golf with Danny, and then we were joking. Of course, we always are joking, having a good time. And then I came back to this meeting, which was this. It was a business meeting, right? But it's also like with this group of entrepreneurs, right? And it has this, like, they've done a great job curating this community, and it feels like you're friends with these people, you're supporting each other, you guys all want the best for each other. So it's this like mix of friends and business, and then on top of that, it's remote. And I've not met any of these people in real life except maybe one. And I came into the middle of the meeting too. So it's like I didn't have a read for the room or any of those types of things. And basically it came to me, and there was the guy who leads this company, and it was like my chance to ask him advice on basically anything. And I was like, oh, sorry, I came in late. I'm not really sure what the format of this is. And they're like, oh, you've got 10 minutes, like you do whatever you want with it. It's like, oh, that's dangerous. And it's like, no, but you could talk about whatever you want. You could ask me something, your opinion on. And it's like, oh. So I said, oh, well, I'm from Texas. What are your thoughts of the abortion law that just came out?
Oh,
crickets.
Oh, really?
Freaking crickets.
Oh, dude,
And
I would have been laughing my butt off.
Exactly.
Oh.
And I was like, ooh, big context switch there.
I know.
And I was like, oh, man. And the best part, too, is like, oh, this is recorded. This is great. Unfortunately, it was a group of, I don't know, 5 to 10 people. And they are people that I feel like safe and comfortable around. But also, I was just announcing the live show. And I literally had just told the other guy, who has a very wholesome brand, very like, positive, encouraging, all those types of things. And he had just gotten done talking about how taking risks, and he's in the stage where he's growing the company, and the struggles of, hey, there's these things that I want to do, these ideas I want to have, but now I have employees, and the kind of stress of, oh, well, if I do that and make that risk, then I'm affecting all these people's lives, health insurance, things like that. And I was encouraging him, like, look, man, like, you're a great person. This is a great company. You have been doing this for a long time. People know you're a solid person. Like, they will forgive you and come to your defense. Like, you're not going to get canceled because of something you said. Like, you have thousands, if not millions of people who know what you are, what you stand for. Like, they'll give you some grace because they know who you are and all of this reputation you built up. So I just got done saying, like, take more risks, try more things. And then I was like, oh yeah, and I have this live show. And then like the first thing I say is like, abortion. And it's like, oh, they're probably like, dang, this guy's got a live show. Oh my gosh.
Well, it's also sort of funny when you're talking about context. One of the things I'd read about lately was what happens within these social dynamics, especially when you're in something that's like a conference room or a board setting, is that oftentimes somebody has to take the lead in laughter, right? Somebody has to take the lead in moving through and then that gives other people permission. So a lot of times within a social dynamic like that, people are looking for permission.
Right.
And I find that to be just sort of, we were talking earlier about the idiot and people attempting to, in this role, I can only behave this way, right? And they sort of like lock down their internal self within these places. And this might have been a great place to actually let loose that internal self and to really make some long-lasting connections. I mean, it's fantastic to be talking about, the struggles with your company and getting feedback and advice from people. But at a different level, like maybe you could just be an authentic person in that moment, and that's really hard to get to sometimes.
Well, and again, like I said, it's amped up because I've not met these people in person, and it is virtual, and it is a work meeting, and it's actually a work meeting with a subset of the people, and so yeah, there's all these layers, right? And then yeah, I was like, oh, okay, moving on. But
Yeah.
that's for me, that was one of the things about humor is, I wasn't afraid to fail in that sense, and I'm not afraid to say those things because I know a lot of times like people will laugh or whatnot. And to be frank, I didn't look in the gallery, so that's another thing. Everyone's muted, so maybe I got one or two chuckles, but
Yeah.
it's just dead silence, right? That's one thing I definitely don't envy comedians who are trying to do, or the people who are doing their shows from home, like say Jimmy Fallon or Ellen or whatever. They're doing this thing. They're typically performing for a live audience, which there's palpable energy you can feel,
Yeah,
and you're
yeah.
going off the crowd.
Right. And then what's funny about that is once you get the crowd into it, even the remote audience feels the energy as well. So, speaking of all this, we do need to transition a little bit into like stand up again with like Dave Chappelle. Have you seen his latest?
His latest,
I think he has one on Netflix called Closer that just came out maybe in the last week.
I know I at least started it. I cannot remember if I finished it, but feel free. Please talk about it.
Well, there was something fascinating because he's definitely using humor, and he's been doing this for a long time as a way to speak truth to power or truth to a system, right? Or at least his truth, and he pushes back against racism and all sorts of other things, and sort of shows incongruities within the system. And when he says it, we all go, "Oh, that's funny because it's true," right? And that's one of the
That's
quotes.
another phrase, right?
Yeah,
It's funny because it's true.
That's such a popular phrase when you get into these things. It's funny because it's true, but he also was bringing up some things that were touchy because there's certain people that apparently you cannot make any jokes around without getting canceled. And so he's pushing back against that culture. He's pushing back against cancel culture. And he's sort of also incorporating race and, just hatred within a general system towards different people. And it's funny because the entire thing just reminded me about truth and victimization and this kind of culture we're in too, where a lot of people claim to be victims very quickly and very easily, and he's kind of pushing back against it. But we're talking about the audience, and I'm watching in the front row. There are a couple of people that are just not happy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, about halfway through the show, you can start watching the audience, and you can just watch these two people are just sitting there, just faces scrunched up.
That's
just,
hilarious
tucked back in
because
their
you would
seat.
almost think that, that they know this thing's being filmed. And I forget. Oh, he did it in a big theater though, right?
Yeah, it was
So
in,
you
like,
can't, you don't have as much
Detroit or
control.
something.
But that is
Yeah.
the thing that some people will do is, right, like especially for the ones that are going to be most filmed, is like we're going to make sure to put people there who we know are having a good time and that
Yeah,
kind of thing,
yeah.
right? So I'm glad to see actually that some people had that kind of reaction because it also shows like, hey, not everything's for everybody and not everyone has to think everything's funny. And then also, one of the things I think we alluded to earlier, but if you don't think something is funny or if you are offended by something, like if you find yourself feeling some sort of negative emotions, like maybe you should turn around and point that finger at yourself and be like, well, why do I think that? Why do I feel
Yeah,
that way?
yeah.
And maybe there's some truth there.
No, there really is, and it's one of the fascinating things is a lot of times I think what he talks about a lot is how we identify with groups or communities, and then when anyone says something about the group, we take that as a personal slight, right?
Even though it's against the whole group, yeah.
Right, and I understand that there needs to be societal pushback against certain things to get enough sort of pressure behind it so that people will stop, uh, stop being homophobic or stop being
Right.
transphobic or stop being racist. So you have to have like there seems to be societal constraints that are built around this, and that comes into like political correctness and other things. Is that these are overall societal pressures to move something a certain direction that at least a majority of people would agree would be progress within that space.
Right. And some of that also comes from, am I a part of the group that I'm making fun of? Because that makes it safer or more politically correct to do, right?
Yeah, I think we're in a space now where only if you're part of that group can you claim to have the inside knowledge to be able to say something about that group. It doesn't mean your group will thank you for it, but at least you can say, this is my authentic reality. I was born in this group. I was raised in this group. And that's also sort of another spot that we've gotten into as a society now, where you can't be or play anything out of sort of your biological self.
And that would be an interesting psychological experiment, which I wouldn't be surprised if they've done, but I would love to see the same joke performed by different people, all abstract, random people who, have good delivery and all that kind of stuff, but they're not somebody who anyone would have any background knowledge or things about, right? So, for example, like if you're making a joke about black people, like Dave Chappelle makes jokes about black people all the time, right? If he's up there making these jokes, saying these things, versus say Jeff Bezos or something like that, it just has a different feel.
It definitely does. And, of course, Chappelle is a master at this, and he's been doing it for a long time. And so what's funny is I might show up for the jokes, but what actually keeps me coming back is that I feel like he has a message he's crafting, and he's crafting the story around a very deep personal message that at times is based on hurt and pain, and he's finding a way to get that message across and to an audience that before was ignoring it.
And I really like his stuff. And just to give a little extra context to who he is, he actually started, I don't know if he started out, but at least his biggest rise to fame came when he had his show. He called the Chappelle Show, and I forget which network it was on, but it ran for a couple seasons, and then he actually ended up leaving because a little bit of tension between him and say I don't want to say the producers, 'cause I don't know exactly who it was, but some people that were creating the show, and then also he found some struggle and discomfort with when the jokes he was talking about, right, and making fun of, for example, the lower class or black people or whatnot, and he was feeling that tension of like, all right, yes, there's jokes, but I also do like feel these certain things and think the world should be this way, and he was feeling kind of tension among all these things, and he talks about this a little bit in one of his other stand-up specials, which you can watch on Netflix. But one thing I wanted to point out was that I think that's kind of been a trend in stand-up comedy, and also as Danny was mentioning when he brought up this the rise of stand-up, he's like, now is a great time for stand-up. There's so many specials, there's so many people have their different spins, and there's a lot of more diversity now, and the people who are doing stand-up, at least on this scale and at this visibility, but that seems to be a trend. Danielle and I watch a decent amount of stand-up specials on Netflix and other platforms, and you see a lot more of them have this kind of message, right? Or combining that with also more and more stand-up, I feel like, is comfortable with taking you to the sadder, the more tragic types of things as a part of this whole stand-up special, or darker side of things, right? Another one that comes to mind is Bo Burnham.
Right.
We turned on his last special late night with some friends a couple months back when it came out, and I was like, oh, I really like Bo Burnham. I'd love to see this. And it's like, all right, 11 o'clock, and you're like ready to laugh, and then we're like, oh, this is dark, and it's like, and I really like it, and also from an art perspective and from the messages he's sharing and the lyricism, a lot of reasons why I like him. But I was like, that wasn't the vibe I was feeling right now.
Yeah, that's something else about this, is it's some of it has moved, it seems like, back into the theater, and we're getting more of that tragedy with the comedy now. But there's also guys like Jim Gaffigan or something, right, who is just lighthearted all the time. It's almost like a whole brand based around family humor.
Yeah.
And so it's almost like exactly what you're getting there. I don't know if it's necessarily too much incongruity. It mostly seems to be him making fun of himself, and you just get to tune in and watch this and laugh.
And one thing that popped in my mind was so tomorrow I'm going on vacation.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're still going to have this show Thursday and Friday, but we will both be doing it remotely, not in this lovely studio that we have. So we'll have a little bit of change of background. But I'm going on a vacation with my in-laws and that greater family. And one of the ways that we've vacationed a lot in the past was cruises. And, cruises seem to be kind of a polarizing thing. I think largely by people who've not been on them, which is kind of funny how that works. But I've been on a lot of cruises now. I would say somewhere in the 5 to 10 range. And one of my favorite things about the cruises is comedy. So we go on the Carnival Cruise Line, which pros and cons to it, but it's largely a family-focused thing. They have activities for everyone. It's also on the lower end of the price spectrum. It's more accessible, not as high class, and you don't have to dress up as nicely for dinner and things like that. But one of the things they have is a comedy club. and not just a comedy club, but they do 2 to 4 shows every night.
Oh, wow.
Which is amazing. It's my favorite part because I love comedy, and it's like, what better way to, get yourself laughing, having some drinks, having a good time, spending time with people that you love. It's awesome. And they have 2 comics. The way they do it on the ones that I've been on, at least, is, and they have the family friendly ones at like 7 or 8 o'clock, and then they have the adult ones later on. And not only is that great because you get that mix of humor, because in my mind, like, it's easier to make the penis joke or make the sister joke or whatever, and those will still get the laugh, right? Also, the easy or the cheap laugh, right? But in my opinion, it can be a little harder to put together family-friendly comedy
man.
that is funny.
Yeah.
And not only is it funny, but it's safe, and also it's funny to people of wide ranges of age. Like, I think that's a much bigger skill.
Yeah, I think that's one of the other things that is maybe not talked about as much, but the sort of classic skill of guys like the Smothers Brothers or something, right? Where they could make people laugh, and they were on television, so it had to be super wholesome. And these guys are insanely like wicked intelligent and smart, but they aren't going to these places that could be dark, that could be inappropriate, and you just go, oh man, like what would happen if you switch that up? So there's something also that we haven't talked about too much, but it's the intelligence that you have to have humor. I think there's the quickness.
Why do you think that I was such a good humorist?
Yeah, well, that's jury's out.
Yeah.
No. And then there's the other interesting aspect that is brought up by guys from Monty Python. That one of them actually said, I don't remember if it's Terry Gilliam, but he sort of said that you have to have pain in your life in order to be a comedian.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you said that, because I was just listening to this podcast, which I think I've shared with you before. It's called No Dumb Questions, and it's I won't get into what it is, but they were talking about The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And they had just read through The Hobbit again as grown men versus being a kid when they first read it. And they were talking about, like, now that I've seen it through this adult lens, I have so much more of appreciation for it, and it's like I can tell, like, this guy has lived, like some of the way this book is written, like he's felt some of these things, he's seen some of these things in the world, and that's affected, like that has made its way into this entire world because he has felt those things and because he has seen those things.
Right.
Yeah, and that's honestly one of the things that I used to look at as weakness. I kind of talking about how it's taken me 4 years to get to this point with my company, and some people are like, to what point? What are you even doing? Right? But that's one of the things that I've really cherished, is that it's enabled me to feel a lot more of these range of emotions and see a lot more of how the way the world works and why things are. And I feel like that has now made me a much richer person in enabling me to better educate and teach and empathize, to bring up that link again, empathy and humor, but also, teaching and connection. That's one of the things for me that, getting the access and feeling all those bigger range of emotions, higher highs, lower lows, I feel like it's made my content and stuff better, and also my humor,
Yeah, no, it does. Like living experience is great, but a lot of some of the things they were talking about was early childhood trauma and pain as something that humor was an escape from. It was a way out of. It was, if you could keep your parents laughing, then they weren't fighting.
Yeah.
So there's some really dark stuff it can kind of get into. But then again, we also have the inverse examples where somebody's like, my entire life was just fine. I was just cruising along, and then just found out I was funny, and so now I'm doing this.
Right. But there is, especially I've been to a decent number of open mics and things like that. And there is a very common theme of depression and, struggling. And that also kind of probably goes hand in hand with the struggling artist type of thing. But also, the closer people are tied to that tragedy, they can then turn that tragedy into comedy. They can relate to things like that. But one last thing I want to get back to before we wrap up is, as my humor evolved, I've always kind of had that sarcastic thing. But I used to be much more attacking of people.
Oh.
And I used to, and that kind of hurts people's feelings. And especially, and sometimes that's visible and other times it's not, right? And a good example is, and I caught myself doing this the other day, and, I was like, oh, I need to not do that. But I was like talking about a buddy's dad bod or, receding hairline or whatever. And it's like, yeah, maybe that gets a laugh or maybe that gets a chuckle, but that might be something that they're actually insecure about and they worry about. And, and obviously that's a person by person type of thing. But yeah, and I wanted to share, this is, my mom had a similar type of struggle in her life. And she actually had someone come to her one time and be like, hey, like, you're really hurting my feelings. And, I would like for you to stop. And that was like a wake up moment for her. And just like for me, I think for her, it's a struggle still sometimes too, because it's like, hey, I'm trying to have a good time making jokes, things like that. But less so at the expense of others. Do you relate to that at all?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I think we've all done the thing where we're trying to be funny and be in the moment and let loose, and at some point, this thing just presents itself, it just pops up into our brain and it
Yeah.
runs out of our mouth, and we didn't really run it through the empathy filter. And maybe in the moment it's getting the laugh, but you know, so we were talking earlier about these, the need for armor, and whenever, and sometimes people feeling laughed at rather than laughed with. That's all difficult. It's difficult to gauge, it's difficult to do, and to sort of stay positive within this space, because I think that's the funny thing about it. We want to laugh because we want to bond and stay positive, but on occasion it can slip into these other realms, and then I think you just have to be as kind of open to fixing that situation and apologizing as you can,
Yeah.
and just trying to wrap that person back into the fold if possible.
Yeah, and that's again where, environment and context and who you're doing those things with, and that's why, like, especially in man culture,
Yeah.
especially here in America, right? Like, bringing other people down is a big part of it. Like, oh, especially when you get sports involved, it's like, oh,
Yeah.
haha, you missed that shot, you scrub, you idiot, blah
Yeah.
blah
Yeah.
blah. And in video games, and it's like, oh wow, come on, dude, let's go. And I do think sometimes it's good, but honestly, I think I'd like to see it move more and more away from that, because I don't think people realize the true implications of it all, especially when you add in the fact that, for example, excuse me, with video games, like, you are removed from that person. Like, they have a screen name, they're not, you can't see how they're
Mm.
reacting, you don't really know this person that well, and maybe it's someone random that you don't know. And so it's like, I think it has more negatives than positive in that sense. But if it's your close buddy and you guys have been friends for 20 years and you know how they really feel about things and all that kind of stuff,
Oh, right.
you can know, which buttons are okay to push and which ones aren't. And I'm okay going a couple minutes over here, because I wanted to ask you and give you the chance. I mean, how has humor been a part of your life, or how has it changed for you? Whether that's like the way
Mm.
that you have joked around, or the way that you found yourself laughing more or less at certain types of things. Feel that however you want.
Oh man, I kind of instantly start going to these sort of darker places of trying to be funny as a way to fit in, and trying to be very humorous in certain contexts so that I could get attention and I could feel loved and all those kind of things. And that's, it's not that I wasn't loved, but I guess I thought I always needed more.
Yeah.
And so there's something really interesting too about getting to a place where you can be calm enough to not rely on humor, not relying on it. You can still tap into it, but it doesn't maybe have to be the default of how you move through the world. Being able to like just sit there and handle something deep. And that can be disappointing to people if
Yeah.
they're not accustomed to you behaving that way. But that's okay.
And you've identified as a people pleaser before, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was probably connected, right?
Oh yeah, totally connected. Had to sort of, and this has just been coming about in the last couple of years, but just getting to a point where maybe humor isn't the space to have to go into all the time,
Mm-hmm.
because humor can also be a tremendous distraction from other deeper levels of emotion. Once again, it sort of can exist at this relief area, or tragedy and comedy and superiority, which are deep things, but if you keep on switching the conversation out of sort of bonding and empathy into humor, I think it can be difficult. So, yeah, I've gone through some phases thinking about that and how to deal with it. And I think it has a time,
Yeah.
and I don't always get the time right. And sometimes things need to go humorous and I stay dark.
Yeah, well, and that's a thing, to ties in very well with kind of like what we were talking about with Bo Burnham and things like that. And we actually saw him live back when we lived in LA, and it was cool to see him live. But also, I found myself thinking, like, man, like, okay, like, how much of this is part of his act, and how much of this is like really him and how he's feeling and thinking. And then I know you can't judge a person based off of one encounter with them on any day, especially if it's only for a short amount of time, right? But we saw him like out on the street or like on the sidewalk after the show or whatever, and like glancing at him, it's like, oh man, he looks sad or depressed, and it's like, huh, like, and then so that kind of deepened that line of thought, like, oh man, like he might be deeply troubled, and it's like maybe there's some truth to that, maybe there's not, but
Yeah. We make up these narratives in our head that this person is just a hoot to hang out with. And then you're just like, maybe not. Maybe they just turn it on stage. And then afterwards, they're just like in a total funk.
Yeah. And so then, to wrap up for today, we talked about humor, and we talked about one of my favorite definitions of idiot, which give it to us one more time, roughly.
Oh, yeah. To behave as if you're your private self when you're in public.
I like that, and I'm gonna tweets the book that later or something. We talked a little bit about the evolution of humor, not a ton, but of how it used to be a little more physical and slapstick, and then it kind of shifted more as the media changed and as people responded to it. And we talked a little bit about why things are funny. We talked about the four main reasons, or four of the main reasons, which was the superiority, feeling you're better than someone, or the situation. The relief, where you think something is bad, but then it's, oh, no, it's not bad. Ha, 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 that's funny, as if someone got hurt, but then they're not actually hurt. We talked about the incongruity, which is where you have a setup and then you completely twist it at the end and something completely unexpected. And then we talked about the mechanical / living, which was, give me the quote one more time.
Yeah, mechanical encrusted upon the living.
Mechanical encrusted upon the living, which is a little bit about having being disconnected a little bit with the way the world is working and the way the life is going, the things are going, and then
it's a complicated one, but yeah, if you think that nature and life is flowing a certain direction, but you are going to somehow control it and apply sort of mechanical means as if we're in a factory or an assembly line and you're going to program out your life, that's funny.
Yeah, I like that. And we talked a little bit about stand-up. And one thing we didn't mention, but I'll say real quick, is if you are an aspiring comedian, listen to me now. Do not attack your entire crowd. Like, if your set's bombing, just lean into it. Like, oh yeah, that sucked. That maybe wasn't funny. Maybe tonight's not the night. Maybe these people aren't the people. But do not say, wow, you guys are the worst, because you think that's going to make the crowd more likely to laugh at you.
Oh, no.
Weird. It's a resounding no. But and I get it, because it's like defensive and you feel attacked because like, oh, my jokes aren't landing, that kind of stuff. So the first thing people do is lash out.
Oh yeah, no, it's because it's you're being very vulnerable when you're up there doing that. And so whenever you're vulnerable and the other person does not reciprocate, it tends not to go well. You got to be very strong not to react negatively to that. So speaking of all that, do we have a challenge?
I'm so glad you said, because that was the next thing that I was going to say. And I'm going to give a choose your own adventure type of challenge here. I'm going to give two options, and I would encourage you to do one or both. The first one, I would encourage you to think, what are ways that you could be a bit more of an idiot today? And when I say idiot, I'm using writer's terminology here, which is being more of your private self in public. What are maybe some ways that you've been too guarded or too locked down? Maybe you've been in a meeting and someone made a joke that you thought was funny, but you didn't laugh because it was in the wrong context. And or maybe you want to show another side of yourself to people that you've been hiding. Or maybe you just want to start doing something. I'm a big fan of anything that gets you to being more you and less what other people think you should be, or even worse, what you think that other people should be. Or sorry, what you think other people think that you should be, right? Yeah, if we can make that connection. So yeah, go and be an idiot. So that's my main challenge. And then the secondary challenge is go watch some stand-up. Check it out. If you're looking for a good one that we thought was pretty funny was Kevin Hart's recent special. He actually did it in his own house, which was cool. And he talks about all sorts of things. I think it's called Zero F's Given or something like that. No F's Given, something like that. And that's how he kind of sets up the whole thing. He's like, hey, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't give an F, right? And it's cool. As a good set, it's pretty funny. But pay attention to your environment and your expectations, right? So don't go in thinking like, oh, this better be funny, or well, this isn't going to be funny. Because guess what? If that's how you go in, you're not going to think it's as funny. Whereas if you're going in, kind of like Ryder was talking about with improv, when you're there, like, you want success for the person. Look for the laughs. And yeah, if you are someone who uses substances, don't be afraid to have a drink or have a little smoke of the Mary J, whatever that gets you a little more laughing. And also, I'll say, it's a lot funnier if you're watching with other people. If you're just by yourself watching it, you're not going to find every joke funny. Maybe you find one kind of funny. But when you got your buddy or your friend or significant other or anyone, right, watching with you, and someone starts laughing, you're going to have a better time. You're going to be more primed to laugh. So those are your 2 challenges for today. Be more like an idiot and go watch some stand-up.
Yeah. That sounds great to me.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for talking with us. And by that, I mean listening to us. But we are so glad to have you guys here. We hope you have a wonderful day and get a little humor in your life today.